So today we're going to be talking a little bit about personal leadership and perseverance. We're going to be talking about the Apollo 13 mission and decision making and pushing through adversity and lessons for leadership. All of that in just one lump sum in this little bitty talk we're going to have here with Mr. Haise. So, Mr. Haise, looking back, what personal qualities do you think were critical in helping you to stay composed during Apollo 13?
Well, the qualities were built in through mostly my training leading up to that point in the military. I had been gone through boot camp of sorts for 4 weeks, 4 months rather, than into flight training, and had served in 2 Marine fighter squadrons, where everything is very rigidly planned and controlled. You use checklists very rigidly, books, if you will, that give you the step-by-step things. And a red section of the checklist is for emergencies, and you train a lot. You train a lot. In some cases, we had simulators. Early on, we didn't, but later we had sophisticated simulators with computers that could make the simulator act and look just like the real vehicle. Could put in failures that would test you. So you felt confident by the time you flew either on test missions or in particular the case of Apollo 13 on a space mission. You felt well prepared and trained and ready to go and handle at least what we called the credible failures that might happen during the flight. Now, Apollo 13 was, we had one of the non-critical failures, an explosion, which caused a situation that was not planned. Because if you had explosions, the FEMA's, failure mean effects analysis for explosions, done by reliability engineering, that always did a study on each possible failure that might happen in the vehicle on any system or whatever. The manifestation of an explosion was you would lose the vehicle and you'd lose the crew. So Apollo 13 gave them a special problem because we were still around after the explosion. So
how did you push through moments of doubt or fatigue when the odds were stacked against you on Apollo 13?
Well, as knowing the system we had in place to the team and the system to handle failures. Most people think of mission control as and they were obviously at the point, always tied to us by radio, so when something went wrong to start the conversation. But many times in all the missions had some things mission control did not have ready answers to. So the way it was built was there was mission control lived in building 30, right next door building 45. Was with the MIR, Mission Evaluation Room, and that room, 2 double doors to go in it. Interesting, you had a sign over the doors, and it said, "God is welcome, all others bring data." And in that room was the members of the program office for the vehicles, representatives from the major contractors that actually had designed and built and delivered the vehicles. See, NASA doesn't build anything. NASA manages, has the money, oversees the design with their engineering, they critique the design or whatever, but the vehicles and the real brain trust that did the design development is out at those plants across the country. In the case of Apollo, it was a very large group. Over 400,000 people worked during the Apollo program. NASA had contracts through the primes to subcontractors, their subcontractors, and piece parts manufacturers to every state in the United States, except one of the Dakotas. They got left out, south or north, I'm not sure. And so through that MIR, and there actually were the major contractor representatives, also in Building 45, they had communication back to that brain trust at 400,000, most of what they'd call on would be the engineering groups that would best be able to handle the problem. And so that was available, and used throughout the program. Two other missions, incidentally, almost did not land. Apollos 14 and 16 had problems that affected the possibility of landing that were worked in real time. In one case, all the way back to Draper Labs in Massachusetts, that gave them a workaround to land on Apollo 14. And back to Rockwell, then it was North American Aviation, in California to save the other mission, Apollo 16, to be able to land.
Good deal. The Apollo 13 mission is often described as a successful failure. What does that mean to you?
Well, that's a buzz statement to figure it out later, but no, I think that was a feeling, if you will, that was in people's minds when we flew missions, that we were going to somehow make things happen. And that had been proven. Again, if you look at the Apollo Total Mission Report, which is a document about that thick, published at the end of Apollo, and back in one of the appendices is a list of anomalies, which are problems, and space vernacular. And if you exclude Apollos 7 and 8, which only had one spacecraft, the capsule, but all the missions that had two spacecraft, the command module and the LEM, to potentially have problems, Apollo 13 had the second least anomalies of the program. So that was I better get my high-tech phone on vibrate. There we go. No, I had a smartphone and fell and broke it, and my grandson Cade, who works in the ship channel with Exxon, he told me Papa should get this phone because it's more sturdy. A lot of workers use it, and it's pseudo waterproof. So that's why I have the cell phone.
So what role did teamwork play and trust play in ensuring the crew made it home safely?
What role did what?
Teamwork and trust.
Well, that was the whole key to the response. We virtually, what we could do was initially, after the explosion, do troubleshooting, although it was also led by Mission Control, what things we should try, because it was obvious immediately we lost one of two oxygen tanks. And the reason that was a problem was the fuel cells, 3 of them, which supplied all our electric power, depended on oxygen and hydrogen to be fed to provide that electric power. And it became obvious in a short time, first by Mission Control, that we were having a slow leak in the other oxygen tank, tank 1. Tank 2 is the one that had the explosion. And so if we cannot stop that leak, we're going to lose all our electric power in the capsule. So we struggled with Mission Control's directions on what to try to isolate, moving switches and closing off things to try to stop the leak in the second tank. And after about just under an hour, it's become obvious that combined we had run out of ideas and we were going to lose that tank. So Jim Lovell and I were asked to go get the landing craft powered up, thing we'd hoped to land on the moon with, so we could use it for something to live off of and buy time, if you will, to sort of work next things. And that's the way it went during that period.
So when everything went wrong, how did you maintain focus on the mission and not get overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation?
Well, to me, it was kind of business as usual. It was interesting, the reflection Ron Howard had when I complained to him about some of the things he had in the movie for human interest. And he told me, he said, well, I got the mission report, which NASA gave me, I read, and I listened to all the radio transmissions throughout the whole mission they had given me. And he said, it never seemed you had a problem. So based on that, I had to humanize you and add in some of these things in the movie.
So you survived not only the Apollo 13 mission, but also nearly fatal plane crash later on in life where you sustained substantial burns. Can you walk us through the events leading up to the crash? What was going through your mind and your mindset during the recovery period?
Well, set the scene, this was at one of the preliminary to one of the air shows. As a hobby, I started flying, and it's still held every year. There's one right here at Ellington. Back then, we held one also at Shoals Field in Galveston. And I had gotten an aircraft. I flew in the air show. It was the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was the opening act of the show, and we kept it at a crop dusters field in Angleton, Texas. So we had an air show actually coming up at Dallas-Fort Worth the next weekend, so I retrieved the aircraft down at the crop duster field to fly to Shoals to get it on a wash rack and get it cleaned up. And I got too close on an aircraft I was flying formation on landing, and decided to go around, and the engine quit at about 400 or 500 feet in the air, headed toward the Gulf. I was flying south, trying to land at Shoals Field at Galveston, and I did not want to go in the water if I could avoid it, because it'd be shallow water. If you ditch an airplane, and this was a fixed gear airplane, the landing gear would not come up. So I'd have probably flipped and ended up upside down. And if you go in you want deep water, so you can swim out from underneath, swim down, and not get trapped in the aircraft in shallow water. But I switched tanks, wobble pump it was called, to pump the fuel pressure. Got it to sputter enough to occasionally to get it milked around backwards from the way I'd come, but on the unused part of the field, way on the west side, and crashed. Ended up one wheel breaking off in rough terrain, wing dug in, flipped, ended up going upside down backwards with the canopy shut and on fire. So by the time I could turn and rotate and kick my way through the canopy, it was a World War II airplane, so it had a very thin plexiglass canopy, which was fortunate, and got out. I had suffered burns over 65%, second and third degree, and went into the University of Texas Hospital at Galveston spent 3 months, with about half the burns being requiring grafting. And for about the first 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I was considered critical because they're worried about breathing hot gases into the lung and damaging the respiratory system. If it does that, you'll last just about that long, 10 days, 2 weeks, and that'll be it. But I found out I had not. So I spent 3 months recovering. I spent up to 14 months with therapy. I had a scar tissue buildup in an elbow, a wrist, and one knee that required a lot of physical therapy to get back to flight status. So it was after that I got back to flight status, and I flew shuttle after that. So that was my time. But as far as what I did, it was just instinctive again, and just all the training and experience I'd had up to that time. Over my career, I'd had been on fire 3 times in airplanes. That was the third, and had survived the other 2. One was an F-86 that was in the picture in the Oklahoma Guard. That happened, caught fire after landing, and that burnt to the ground. But I got out before it really got going. And another was an afterburner fire on an aircraft when I was out at Edwards. But that's just a sense of the career I had and things going wrong, which happened. I've lost engines before on aircraft too.
Oh, so after overcoming such life-threatening challenges, how did your perspective on risk, failure, and perseverance change?
It really didn't. I mean, it was part of the business. I know many of you would have a hard time. Some people always ask me, why did I go back to flying? It was my job. I try to give them a sense of race car driving. Most people, that's down on earth, and most people can appreciate race car driving. And a person who's a professional in that business, they often, if they race long enough, they're going to lose steering, tire's going to blow, or they'll hit other vehicles, there'll be a big crash. Some of them are injured, some of them are even burned, even though they wear protective garments. But nevertheless, most of them, if they can get repaired, what are they going to do? They're going to go back to racing, because that's the profession, that's their job, that's what they enjoy, that's what they're good at. And I think it was the same for me. That was what I did for a living, and I didn't want to give it up just because I had a little crash.
So if you could distill your life experiences into one lesson about resilience, what would you want this audience to take away? Well,
it was never give up. You never give up, and no matter what the circumstances, and have confidence, and certainly in your mind, that either you individually can work through it, or you with this team will be able to solve the problems. I'll just mention again the movie. One other fallacy of the movie is it didn't show all the people that were involved. And I complained to Ron Howard about that in a meeting I had with him, and he said, well, you only got 2 hours or so in the movie. You can only develop so many characters, because I would guess, I don't know specifically, but I would guess several thousand people were involved in working through the solutions to some of the problems. For instance, played in the movie was the lithium cartridge fix, where carbon dioxide was building up. That actually was led by a neighbor of mine, lived 2 doors up from where I lived in El Lago. In fact, my son Fred stayed with him during the flight, with all the, get my son out of the way of all the press and stuff at home. And he led the Crew Systems Division in Building 7 at Johnson, and they were responsible for the spacesuits, for the environmental systems on both the capsule and the lunar module. They actually knew from a list, there's a list actually in a book again, that lists what's the storage list, what everything is on board the spacecraft, and what compartment it's in, etc., so you can find it. And looking through that, they knew the material they had available to work with, and they created a prototype of that cartridge using command module cartridge. And they happen to have one chamber with the LEM environmental system in it. So they actually put that into that vacuum chamber in Building 7, impregnated the chamber with carbon dioxide, and tested that cartridge would work, the prototype. So then people in Mission Control had to tediously write up the steps to build it, telling us what material to get out of storage and how to fabricate that on board the spacecraft. So it was read up step by step, and that's the way all those things were. They were read up in checklist format that we would have to write on board. An interesting problem with that, we had no blank paper on board. Don't ask me why, but we had no blank paper, so the backs of books would be ripped off, which were blank, both sides. And those were the kind of things that were used to write down all these special procedures that were read up at different times during that flight.
Wow, well, that leads us straight into the next question. What message would you share with those who work behind the scenes, like our support staff, who may not always be visible but are essential to success?
Well, I think that particularly for things that you would have to worry about, problems, and there's obviously a variety in schools these days. I would assume you and have procedures in place, process to do for fires, for children misbehaving or whatever, of what to do. And certainly in the case of evacuations and things, you have probably schools have drills that you go through periodically to make sure everybody knows to follow the procedure that's written and you should follow. Now, how often and how obviously important is how familiar you are and the children in following what you've practiced to be able to do that. It was a lot easier in the schools I went to. Just to give you an example, the elementary school in Biloxi, Mississippi, I went to, it was open hallways. The hallway on one, there was no wall on one side of a hall, any of the halls, and the doors then on the other side led straight into the classrooms. So, for instance, if you had a fire, and also there was no air conditioning. Did not exist at that time when I was in elementary school. So we had the kind of windows that would open. In fact, most of the time they were open, at least part way to get a breeze in. So if you had a fire, the kids could just crawl out the window. So they didn't have to go out even use a door to get out. But if they went through the door, they could just go straight out and hop off that other side of the hallway, which had no wall, and go right into the schoolyard. So it would be a little easier process.
Awesome. So how do you think the Apollo 13 mission can inspire those of us working in education to stay mission focused even when things get tough or go off course?
Well, I think that's, again, just in the training that you do. What I hope you do mostly in children is somehow through the curriculum and through your teaching, convince them that they should use the talent they have. It's most important. I do a lot of school events Zoom-wise. This year, to this date, almost all school, over 40, I've done 60 Zoom events since January. And with schools all over the country, some foreign. I did one in Mexico City with 500 children, to Portugal with 3 classes, Paris, France, South Africa, a group. So I've done a lot of these events, and my opening and ending message is not to talk them into trying to be a pilot or an astronaut, but to think about the talent they've been born and blessed with, and how to best use that talent in the sense of as they're growing up, and think about what they're going to do with their life and where to go beyond, say, high school for a career path, which may involve either technical training or may involve more schooling. One chart I use, incidentally, that I briefly just show, and it might sort of the trail by age of my career, and highlighted the education, schooling and education I had that allowed my progress through that career, including one I point out on the right side, highlighted, is at 39 years old I went back to school. When I changed slightly my career path to get into the business world, I realized I didn't know much about business planning, marketing, accounting, finance, so I actually went to a 4-month course at Harvard Business School to kind of get a little of that sense before I went to work with the Grumman Corporation.
Wonderful. I want to thank you for being with us today. The team here everybody's been in awe with everything you've had to share with us. I want to thank you very much on behalf of Pasadena ISD. Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Haise.
Thank you.
And I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have that are burning in your thoughts, or that are prompted, or just curious things you want to know about any of the missions you was on. It's a quiet group.
Feel free.
Nancy?
So you had mentioned that you wanted to start off as a journalist.
What's that? Yeah, oh yeah. Through 2 years of junior college, it's now called community college, in Mississippi. I was sports editor 1 year. I was editor of the Bulldog Barks, was a newspaper, the second year, and now I was fully intent on working newspapers. I had worked freelance even during high school. I was sports editor on a high school paper, and the big reporter would give me the jobs they didn't want to do, if it was a Pee Wee League game or something like that. And then the summers, though, both summers in the junior college, I worked full-time at the newspaper, the Gulf Coast Biloxi, Gulfport Herald, now the Sun Herald. I worked full-time summers, and the desk chief, Mr. Eisentraff, alternated the summers. 1 year he gave me all of the, I'll call it the big hotels there, the tourist hotels. for the big conventions and meetings, those sorts of things, feature writing. And the next summer he gave me City Hall, the police beat, and the courts, so to get a variety of experience in the articles I wrote. So I was fully intent on following through and going to be a newspaper person. But the Korean War had come on, and my dad and 2 uncles had served in World War II, and I thought I should serve my country. And my dad always insisted I become not insisted, but encouraged me to think about something that would lead to becoming an officer. And the only program I was 18 years old with 2 years of college. I'd graduated from high school at 16. Also, one thing back then, they let you skip grades. So I went through the 3rd and 4th grade in 1 year. That's how I ended up graduating early. And also no kindergarten. So I went straight into 1st grade. But at any rate, I went into the Naval Aviation Cadet Program to fly airplanes, land on carriers, and had never been in an airplane in my life. Not even sitting on the ground. I was never interested in aviation. But it was the thought of becoming an officer, but it was one of these things where from the first time I flew, I mentally changed my career path. I said, there was no space program, incidentally. I mean, you couldn't want to be an astronaut, but I said, my work ahead, my career ahead is going to be in aviation. I didn't know quite what it was going to be, but that was my thoughts when I first started flying.
Okay, so in your midst of, you had to have thought we could die in Apollo 13, how did you harness calmness, focus during, did you ever panic?
Well, the thought you may die was all through my career, really. The first 2 Marine squadrons I was in mentioned, 6 pilots were lost. And when I went in at 18 and went to the squadrons, that was through those years. So that was the nature of the business. I'd lost people all along the way. And so I was not really focused on dying, although I knew it was possible. In fact, in the squadron, the normal policy was you would designate someone in the squadron, normally your best friend, that would be the one that would take care of your family, at least the administrative part. Obviously, if you passed away, the other pilots in the group, their wives, would be there to help the wife through the aftermath. But that person would handle all the procedural administrative aspects. And the same way in the astronaut program, you had a designee. Jerry Carr, who later flew the last Skylab mission, was a neighbor, fellow Marine. So I had Jerry at my house before I flew Apollo 13 and showed him where all the paperwork was, insurance policies, etc. So he was familiar, and he was the one I designated that would handle affairs if I didn't get back. So that was just a normal practice that would make it easier for the wife and the family to get through it if you didn't make it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
In the video that we saw the tail
Right.
plane flapping away. Want to explain what was going on with that?
Yeah, that's a good example. Talk about several things. That was a PA-30 Comanche, a Piper aircraft. I had actually just finished a 1.5-year program. I was a lead test pilot on testing 7 general aviation aircraft, kind you would see at local fields at general pilots fly, because the Civil Aeronautics Board had noticed in 1964 an increase in the accidents in that class of aircraft and increase in fatalities. And so they asked NASA to run a program to look at the handling qualities and features of those aircraft that might stand improvement as part of the problem. Although a major problem was many pilots who fly those type aircraft are low time pilots. They don't have a lot of flight experience. They don't fly often enough, so they're not proficient. So a lot of the accidents I reviewed, at least a part of that was involved in having the accident. But nevertheless, because we were a high-speed operation at where I was at Flight Research Center at Edwards. X-15 program was going on, a rocket ship that I hoped to fly but never got the chance. That we launched from a B-52, and it could go up over 50 miles. Several flights went over 60 miles high, and back in those days. In fact, Joe Engle, who joined the astronaut program in my group, Joe was already an astronaut. He had flown the X-15 and had gone over 50 miles, which the Air Force made you an astronaut. So he was an astronaut when he joined the astronaut. But nevertheless, they asked us to look at this group, and I'd spent a year and a half doing complete stability and control testing, spin testing, etc., on all these aircraft. And I actually brought in subject pilots of different type and experience. I brought in the Air Force people, gave them a test card to follow, do certain maneuvers, and give me their evaluation, a numerical rating. And I brought in private pilots from a local field near Lancaster, California, and brought in some friends out of my test pilot school and other NASA research pilots to do these qualitative test evaluations of each of these aircraft that went into the report. But at any rate, I finished it, and the FAA at Los Angeles, Joe Tim Chisholm, who is one of the founders of the Experimental Test Pilots Association, called and asked if we could run a short program on this PA-30, that there had been 3 fatal accidents, and on the third one, a visual observation had seen the tail come off the aircraft. So we got this PA-30 and instrumented it quickly with some strain gauges on that horizontal stabilizer, and had a oscillograph hooked up on board. We had no telemetry, so unlike today where you get real-time data, we had to collect it on an oscillograph on board the vehicle aircraft. I had one camera pointing aft at the tail at 75 frames a second. I had a chase pilot in a Cessna 310 with a NASA photographer shooting 400 frames a second. That was what you saw, was a camera shooting at 400 frames per second, and one just at normal speed for gee whiz, so to speak, for a NASA photo. And so the way we approach testing, it's unlike Hollywood. If you have a new aircraft, you don't take it out and dive it to the highest speed or the highest altitude. You try to approach it incrementally and plan, and that's what we did. We knew the red line on the aircraft, which is actually on the airspeed indicator. It says max speed, and normally the aircraft is certified, should be able to go 15% beyond that speed and be safe. So we started well below the red line. I say well below, about 20, 25 miles an hour for our first test point. Unfortunately, the way we had to do the testing was to go up to that trim at that speed at a certain altitude, and then I would wrap the yoke with the back of my fist that would excite the dynamics that might trigger this flutter. And so we'd land, so we'd only get one data point at a speed well below the red line. So we thought we had a lot of safety margin. And then Dr. Cordes and Russ Barber, the flight engineer, test engineer I was working with, they would do the analysis and look for zeta not approaching 0. Zeta was a damping factor. If it got to 0, that's where you'd have flutter. So we did that incrementally, only went up 5 miles an hour intervals, and I was still below the red line when this happened. And the reason was those aircraft, and most of them still of that type, are no hydraulics. They're all cable pulley. So they have to be rigged correctly within certain tolerances, or there can be enough slack that will allow that to happen. And that they found out. They went to Long Beach after this accident and looked at about 10 aircraft down there of this type and found about half of them out of tolerance. So the FAA issued an AD which grounded all those aircraft wherever, and then issued follow-up instructions to have that checked more frequently on that type of aircraft. It was the first one that had an all-movable horizontal system.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So you mentioned that at the entrance of the facility, there was a sign that said, you know, God is welcome, bring data. But was there a moment, I mean, having so many in your life experiences, that you had a moment where your faith was tested, or you felt, you know, your presence, God's presence, or talking to God, either when you were in the Apollo 13 or?
No, I never had a religious experience. Some people I know that went, a few of my friends, Bill Pogue was one, and Jim Irwin another. They had a religious experience and going to the moon. Jim Irwin started a fellowship in Colorado, dedicated with a foundation to support, that time, mostly pilots and families that had come back from Vietnam. And Bill Pogue became a lay minister in the Baptist Church in Arkansas after that, his flight later in life. But I did not have a religious experience. I guess my knowledge of astronomy and how big the universe is, to me, going to the moon wasn't going very far.